Hi there, this is Imaneo. Welcome to my channel. So this is the second episode of building Flappy Dash game, and in this episode we are going to take a look at the FlameGame engine and talk about more about the details. So if you click on the documentation here, you see that we have some documentation here. For example, the first one is file structure that we are going to take a look later. And the first thing that we are going to take a look is the game widget. By the way, I just want to mention that I'm not going to go through all the documentation here because they are written well here. You can just read them. And I just want to introduce the components or the parts that are related to the episode. So for example, in this episode, we are going to take a look at these three documentations. Maybe, for example, later we take a look at the collision detection or other things. But for now, let's jump into the game widget. Yeah, basically the game widget is the point that the Flame engine starts working. So it's just like a normal widget. For example, it extends a stateful widget and you can just put it in the widget tree. And for example, here it is on the root of widget tree of Flutter. You can directly pass it in the run app. And yeah, so inside that you are gonna pass a game. So this is the only required field. And the game is the topmost component of Flame engine. So in Flame, we have some components instead of widgets. Here we have components, and the game is the root component of the FlameGame engine. So I'm going to explain you later, but the point is that game widget is just a widget that renders the game that you pass inside the constructor. And also we have other properties, for example, text direction, loading builder. So this is for when you are loading some assets or your components need to load an audio or something like that. So this is for when that the game is not ready yet. You can show some loading indicator or a progress bar or something like that. We have error builder, that is for when there is an error happened when loading the assets. Or here we have background builder. So here you can pass a widget that shows behind everything in the game. And yeah, so we have overlay builder map. This is something that allows you to put some components or some widgets on top of the Flame widget. So suppose that you have your game and on top of that you want to render some pause menu or you want to render some Flutter widgets. For example, on the top side of the screen, you can have the health bar, you can have the score and these kind of things. And yeah, I will put the link into the description, but we can just have it in the application that we have. So it's here. This is an empty project that I just created. So it's the normal Flutter counter app. And now I'm gonna create a branch because in this series I'm going to create a new branch per episode, so you can follow the code that we write in each episode. For now I'm going to create part 2. Yeah, the part 1 was just an overview. We don't have anything, but this is the part 2. And yeah, so I'm going to create a home page here or main page. Yeah, we can write stateless to have the stateless widget, and it's a main page. And here I'm going to have a game widget, but before that we need to import the Flame dependency. So let's see how can we do that. I think we can open the PubDev website and search for Flame. Yes, it is here, and the latest version is 1.18.0. So yeah, we can just run flutter pub add flame. So this is the command that you can run, and it just adds the dependency with the latest version in the pubspec file. And if you take a look, yes, so we have the latest version of Flame. Okay, so here we can have a game widget. Yeah, so now we need to have a game here to pass inside the game widget. So it should be, it should be a game, and game is an abstract class. And if you take a look at the implementation, so let's filter them. We have a FlameGame. So this is the class that we can use. I'm going to create a new file. It is called Flappy Dash Game. And yeah, it extends the FlameGame. Yes. Let's import the flame, and inside that we can pass a word. So I'm gonna create a new class, Flappy Dash word. Yeah. Okay, so let me talk about the word concept here. There are two concepts that are very important in all of the game engines that you can imagine. We have word and also we have camera. So suppose that the word object is something just like the current word that we have. So you can have lots of things or lots of components inside the word. For example, in our game, we have a character, we have a dash that is jumping around the screen. We have some pipes, we have the background, and these are all components that we can add them into the map. And the camera is something that looks at the components that you have in the map. So suppose that you have a very big map. For example, in GTA game, we have a big map, a very large map. It's 3D and there are a lot of cars, there are people, there are buildings, and a lot of things exist in the map. And the camera is the player that moves around. So you see the world from the perspective of the player. So when you move the player, you can just take a look at the world that you created. And in a 2D sample, I can just show you the TTG that I already talked about in the preview. So here, for example, yeah, so these are the components that we have in the map. And when the rocket lands inside the planet, the camera moves up. Take a look. Yeah, you see that we have a world, and every time the rocket lands on a planet, we move the camera to show another part of the world. So yeah, this is the concept of the world and also the camera. Yeah, and so that's why here we created the world and we can just add it here. Now let's just create the constructor. It can be a const Flappy Dash game, which calls super. And inside the super, we have to pass the word. So we are going to create a new object of our word. Okay, it seems it should not be const. Yeah. And also there's a camera concept, as I already talked about. We can say camera component with fixed resolution. So I'm gonna explain you what is it. For example, 600 on 1000. Yeah, so now we have the game and also we have the word, which is this component, and also we have the camera. So we chose fixed ratio for the camera. So this way we are pretty sure that the game runs on a fixed aspect ratio in every device. So no matter are you running it on a TV or on a small mobile, so the aspect ratio is always the same. And this is the dimension that you have in the game. For example, if you create a rectangle with 600 and 1000 height in the game, it fills all the screen. And if you have the rectangle with half size, for example, 300 on 500, it takes the half size of the screen. So this locks the aspect ratio, and also it determines the sizing that we have in the game. So simply there's a word that we just add the components inside it, and there's a camera that looks at the component that we have. And I think it's enough for now. And if you want to know more about the camera and the word, I have another video in the color switch game. So there we had the camera that we had to move the camera, and that's why you can watch the video to understand the word and camera concept. But for now, I think that's fine. And in the main, let me remove everything. And also let me remove here. Let me remove all the comments here. And we can just put the game inside here to have it as a root object or root widget in the Flutter app. But I'm going to keep the structure of material app. We can just change the name to Flappy Dash, and yeah, we can get rid of theme, and here we can just use main page. Yes, so let me run it again on the macOS. Okay, there's something wrong. Here we need to have a game. So we can change it to a stateful widget, and here we can have a late reference of Flappy Dash game. Yeah, and in the init state we can just initialize it once, Flappy Dash game. Yes, so here we can just add the Flappy Dash game here, and let me wrap it with a scaffold, and the body is the game. So yeah, and what do we have here? Oh, we just removed the curly bracket here. Yeah, so let me run the game. Yeah, so now we have an empty and blank game here. Everything is black, and because we don't have anything in the word, for example, we can just change the background using the background builder that I already talked about. Here you can context. Here you can return a widget. For example, you can return a container, and it draws the container behind everything. So for example, the color is colors.gray, and if you hot reload, you see that everything turns gray. Yeah, so I'm gonna remove the background builder. I just wanted to make sure that everything is rendered correctly. Okay, so we have the game ready, and now I want to talk about the game loop. And yeah, so simply there are some functions that you can override in the game, and the most important ones are render and update. And yeah, so by the way, we have the flow of the functions that are calling and you can override. The first one is onGameResize. So it is called whenever you add or whenever you resize the screen, and it contains the information about the size of the window that the game is running on. And after that we have onLoad, so it runs once on the life cycle of a component. And then we have onMount. So basically in the onLoad you can just load the assets that you need to render your component. For example, when we want to render the dash in the middle of the screen, we need to load the assets. For example, load the image, or if you have some audio or if you have some animation, you can just load everything inside the onLoad method that you can override, and it is async, so you can just have some async functions or async loads here. And the onMount is when the component is added to the screen and it's going to be rendered in the next frame. So this is a void method. You cannot do anything asynchronous here. And after that we have update and render methods. So these are the methods that are calling in every tick or every frame. So basically in the update, you need to update the state of your component. For example, update the position, update the rotation, or anything, update the state. And in the render, you just need to render or draw the component. So for example, in the render, you have access to the canvas, so you can do anything that you want. And for example, in the game that we are going to implement, there's a player, there's a dash inside the game, and it falls down, and you can hit the space or tap on the screen to jump the player. So for example, the logic should be happened in the update. You need to update the position based on the gravity, based on the force that you add when you hit the screen or press the space. And then after you updated the state, you can render it in the render method because you have the canvas method here. And it is very important to be careful to not add the heavy logics here because they are running in every frame, and it's very important to keep the logic short and simple. So prevent doing any heavy calculations or something like that here. But in the next videos, we are going to talk more about the update and render methods. And if it is removed from the parent, for example, sometimes you need to reuse the same component, you can just change the parent to another component, and in that case these functions are calling again. Yeah, and for example here in our game we can just overwrite the onUpdate, update, and render. Yeah, it is, oh, not the render tree but the render, yeah. And we can say super.render with the canvas, and let's import the canvas. And yeah, so let me hot reload, or before that let me add the print statement. And here I can just print the DT here. Yeah, if you hot reload, you see that Flame calls these functions in every frame. And for example, you can also implement the onLoad. So it is a future or void. You can decide to have the void here. Yeah, if you don't have anything async to load, but you can also have future. And here you can have your async load assets. We can have the print statement here, and we have the onGameResize. Let's print it again here, and yeah, here is the point that we restarted the application. The onGameResize called with these values, and after that onLoad method called, and then I'm pretty sure onMount method calls here. Oh, let me remove these two because I don't want to see a lot of prints here. Yeah, so this is the point that we restarted the application. onGameResize, onLoad, onMount, and again onGameResize. So this is called whenever you change the size of the screen. These functions gets called with the new updated value. And yeah, so I think it's enough to know about the game loop. And basically you load the assets here, and you need to clear the resources that you are using here on remove. So for example, if you have some streams to listen on something, or if you have some heavy resources, you can just clear them in the onRemove. Yeah, for example, here it said that you can just remove the children, remove the images, assets in the onRemove function. And yeah, so I think it is enough for the game loop. And the next thing that I want to talk about is components. So Flame uses a lot of components inside the Flame widget or FlameGame. Yeah, so there is a tree of components, just like what we have in the Flutter. We have a widget tree, but here we have component tree. And it is called Flame Component System, or FCM in short. And yeah, so basically we have a component concept, and it can have a list of children, and we have many different components that you can use. For example, FlameGame is a component itself. We have position component, we have a sprite component, and I'm gonna explain some of them. So basically you can add components into the game, or you can add another components into the components itself. So this is how the component tree works. And as you see here, the FlameGame itself is a component. So it's a component tree root, and it extends the component. And here you have some abstract things. For example, isMounting is a flag that determines whether the component is mounted or not. We have isRemoving, we have these futures. For example, you can listen to the loaded future to get realized when the loading is finished. So as you remember, we can have some async jobs in the onLoad method. Or for example, we have contain, so it can tell you whether the component is inside the children of this component or not. And you have update, you have render. Yeah, you have all the methods that you have in the game. So here, as you remember, we had these overridden functions, but this is coming from the component itself. So you can have these functions on every component that you have in the Flame. And for example, you can add a component, you can add a list of components, for example, add all. You can remove a component and a lot of things. So yeah, this is the abstract concept of component, and we have a lot of implementation of them here. And I'm gonna explain some of them. So this is the life cycle that I already explained you. We have update and render that are the most important functions here. And yeah, we have the priority concept. So suppose that you have some components on the screen and you want to render a component on top of everything. So for example, in our Flappy Dash game, we have the player that's a dash in the screen, and we have background and we have pipes. So we can just define the priority like that. The background is drawn on behind everything, and then we have pipes, and after that we have the player and it is on front of everything. So we can just increase the priority to let the Flame know that it should render the player on top of everything. Yeah, and it's an integer. For example, you can set the priority 0 for the background, you can set priority 1 for pipes, and also priority 2 for the player that makes sure that it draws on top of everything. And if you don't provide the priority, it works like the order of the components that are added. And here we have composability of the components. Yeah, as I already said, for example, here you have a component, and here you can add another component inside the component that you have. For example, here we have game over panel, which is a component, and in the onLoad function, we just added the game over text and game over button. So these are also the component that can be added inside another component. And yeah, for example, here we have the game, and in the onLoad, we just added a position component, and it has some children, for example, high score display, hit point display, and these are all components. And yeah, so I'm going to explain the most important ones because you can just read everything here. Oh, by the way, the key concept is important. Just like what we have in the Flutter, we can define keys for the widgets. Here you can define keys for the components, and you can have access to the specific component using a key. For example, this is a random component, and as a key we have component key.named player. So this is the name, or this is the key of the component that you defined here. And later you can query it using the FlameGame from another point of the component tree. You can just say FlameGame find by key, and inside that you can pass component key.named player. So this way you can just get the reference of the player that you already defined in another point of the component tree. And yeah, so I'm going to talk about position component at first. So position component is the most important component in my opinion, because it has position, it has size, scale, angle, and anchor. So these are the most properties that you have for the components in a 2D game. So you can just use position component to position them, to size them, and to show them. For example, we can just in the FlameGame, as I said, we have onLoad, and we can just change it to the void. And yeah, I can write add, and here I need to add a component. I can say position component, or let's say we have a player or dash which extends a position component, and here we can just add the dash. And if I run it, oh, by the way, it's better to add the component inside the word. As I already explained, we have a word concept and we have a camera, and you need to add your component to the word, and that way the camera can just show the components that are added to the word. So I'm just going to cut this code to paste it here. And okay, so with this code, we just added a dash inside the Flappy Dash word. So as I said, we have a word, and if you run, nothing happens because It is just a positioned component. It doesn't have any size, it doesn't have any position. And yeah, so for example, you can implement the constructor here. You can say that position is 0 and 0. You can say size it is, for example, 20 and 20. And if you run it again, nothing happens because we are not rendering anything here. You can just implement the render function as I said. And for example, you can say canvas.draw rect or circle, for example, and the offset is 0. The radius is, for example, 20, and the paint is something like basic palette dot blue dot paint. Yeah, so here we need to have an offset. We can just say offset dot 0. Yeah, and if you run it again, you see that we have something on middle of the screen. So yeah, the basic palette is just something that provided by the Flame team. So it just provides a paint for you. You could just write paint dot color equals colors dot blue. Yeah, but the point is that it creates a new paint object in every frame. So that's not efficient. That's why I used basic palette dot blue dot paint. Yeah, so this is the position component that we just created, and it's here. And as you remember, we had update method here. So here you can just update the position. As you remember, position component has a position, it has size, it has angle, and lots of things. And you can just say position.x plus equals 1. And if you hot reload, you see that it's going to the right because +1 means on the right. And if you decrease the x, it goes left. And for example, if you increase the y, it goes bottom. And if you decrease it, it goes up. So if you decrease both of them, it goes top left. And yeah, so this is how position works. You can just update the position of your position component in the update method. And for example, let's change it to draw rect. Do we have two rect? Yes, it seems. We can have basic palette dot red maybe. Yeah, if you hot reload, you see that there is something on the behind of the circle. Yeah, this is the square. And for example, here you can change the angle plus equals of this value, for example. Yeah, something weird is happening. I'm not sure why, but the size is changing. But yeah, I think that there's an issue with the toRect method. We can just have a rect from center. Offset can be offset.0, width can be size.x, and height can be size.y. And if you hot reload, yeah, it works well now. And yeah, so you see that you can just change the angle, you can change the position. Yeah, also we have a concept here, delta time. I'm gonna explain it later because we just want to talk about components in this episode. Let me change the size here. Yeah, so we just took a look at the position component, and we have a sprite component after that. So a sprite component is a component that can render an image. So a sprite is nothing more than an image here. For example, it is player.png, and if you load the sprite component or if you add it inside the Word, you will see that the image is showing on the screen. And here we have a sprite animation component. So suppose that you have 3 frames of an animation, or I don't know, 20 frames of an animation. you can just load all the sprites, and this component creates the animation based on the provided frames of the animation. And the other one is for example, we have SVG component. So here you can have an SVG to load into the game. And for example, here we have shape component. We have a polygon component which draws a polygon. We have also rectangle component. So instead of creating a custom component that shows the rectangle, we could just add a rectangle component. And let's import the pie. If you run it again, you see that it just draws a component. So if you take a look at the implementation, you see that it extends a polygon component, and in the polygon component, you see that it overrides the render function, and it draws a path based on the corners of your polygon. And finally, it extends the shape component. Shape component extends position component, and so it means that in the rectangle component, you will have access to the position size and everything that the position component provides. And after that, we have parallax component. So this is very important for our game. So as you remember in the previous episode, we have some background layers here, and let me play it. You see that the trees are moving, and inside that we have some clouds and they are also moving. So with the parallax component, you can have some layers of a background or an image, and then you can move them with a speed that works like the closer one moves faster and the other ones move slowly based on the distance that they have to you. And so this is the parallax component. We are gonna take a look at it in the next episode, I think. So here we have isometric tile map. So there is a website called kenny.nl. So it gives you a lot of free assets here. So suppose that we have isometric assets. It is something like this. For example, if you look at this image, it seems like 3D, but it is not. It is just 2D graphics, and with a technique you make them look like 3D. So for example, you see these are all 2D shapes, and if you put them beside each other, it feels like 3D. So this is the isometric tiles map that helps you to create the isometric maps that look like 3D, but it is not 3D. And so we have a lot more here. You can just take a look at them, and you can just play around with them in the world that you have. You can just add any component that you are curious about. But the thing that is important for me is anchor. So there's a concept called anchor, and it says from which point of the component Flame should grab your component. So for example, here in both components, it is top left. So it means that Flame grabs these two components from the top left point of them. And if you click, the anchor changes. For example, now it is top center. If you click, for example, this is center. So you are pretty sure that when you say we want to draw this component on 0 and 0 point, you are pretty sure that the Flame grabs the component from 0 and 0. Or for example, this component can also be center. So the center point is the point that the Flame grabs the component. And so I think we are done with this episode. We just wanted to take a look at the game widget, game loop, and components. And in the next video, we are going to use some of these components to implement the game. So as you remember, we have the background, we have pipes, we have the player. So for example, this one can be a position component, and in the render method, we can render the sprite. Or these are also can be sprite components. So we can just load an image to show them here. And also for the background, we can use parallax component that I already explained. And so we are gonna take a look at them in the next episode. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and also please share it with your friends and your colleagues who like to build a game. because it motivates me to publish more video. And yeah, so stay tuned for the next video. We are going to implement the player, we are going to implement the pipes, and we are going to use the components that we already got familiar with. And see you in the next video. Bye.